It was a cool evening in April 2019 in Stoke-on-Trent, England, and 18-year-old Megan Newton was heading home after a night out. Megan, a youth football coach and aspiring sports therapist, had a bright future ahead of her. Her friends described her as outgoing, kind-hearted, and always willing to lend a helping hand. That night, however, her kind nature would lead her into the path of unimaginable danger. At the taxi rank, Megan ran into an old acquaintance, Joseph Trevor, a 19-year-old semi-professional footballer. They had known each other casually from school, and while not close, there was enough familiarity for Megan to trust him. Trevor, however, was in trouble. He had been drinking heavily, and earlier that night, door staff had confiscated a bag of ketamine from him. Too intoxicated and afraid to face his police officer parents, Trevor found himself with nowhere to go. In what Megan's family would later describe as a typical act of kindness, she offered Trevor a place to sleep at her flat. It seemed like a small gesture, one friend helping another in need, but by the next morning, Megan would be dead, and Trevor would be gone, leaving behind a scene of devastation and horror. At 3:45 a.m., Megan and Trevor arrived at her apartment. CCTV footage captured them entering the building, Megan looking calm, Trevor stumbling slightly but composed. Neighbors reported hearing no commotion, no signs of the nightmare about to unfold. But within hours, Megan's lifeless body would be discovered, and the truth of what had happened in those early morning hours would shock the entire nation. What had gone so terribly wrong? Who was Joseph Trevor, and what could have driven him to commit such a brutal act? As investigators pieced together the events of that night, they uncovered a story of betrayal, violence, and a young life cut tragically short. Megan Newton's life was full of promise. At just 18 years old, she had already achieved what many only dream of, a coaching role with the local youth football team and a passion for sports therapy that she planned to turn into a lifelong career. Megan's love for football wasn't just a pastime, it was a calling. She was on track to study at university and was excited to pursue a future where she could help others, blending her love of sports with her talent for motivating people. Friends and family often spoke of Megan's kindness. She had an instinct for helping those in need, and her flat was a sanctuary, not just for her but for friends who might need a place to stay or someone to talk to. It was this kindness that would tragically set the stage for the horrific events of that April night. But no one could have predicted that her open-heartedness would be exploited by someone like Joseph Trevor. As Megan welcomed Trevor into her flat that night, she couldn't have known the danger he posed. While Megan's life was a story of hope and ambition, Trevor was marked by dark secrets and a troubling past. Investigators would later uncover a critical detail that added a chilling layer to this tragedy. Trevor was already under investigation for an alleged sexual assault. Months earlier, Trevor had been accused of raping a 17-year-old girl, but his case never went to trial for reasons that would outrage after Megan's death. Trevor had been released on bail and allowed to move freely, despite the severity of the allegations. Did Megan know about this? Likely not. To her, Trevor was a familiar face, a former schoolmate in need of a safe place to sleep. She had no way of knowing that his history carried dark and dangerous implications. As the two entered Megan's flat in the early hours of the morning, neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere was far from calm. Megan's trust in Trevor would soon turn into her worst nightmare. What exactly triggered Trevor's violent outburst remains unclear, but the evidence left behind told a story of sheer brutality. Later that morning, Megan's body was discovered by her landlord. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and stabbed repeatedly. The scene was one of unspeakable violence, the kind of horror that investigators rarely encounter, even in the darkest cases. Trevor, meanwhile, had fled the scene, leaving Megan's family and the entire community in a state of shock and confusion. What could have driven Trevor to commit such a heinous act? As detectives began to dig into his past, they uncovered troubling signs of aggression and a pattern of behavior that suggested this wasn't an isolated incident. But the full scope of Trevor's depravity would only come to light during the investigation, as forensic evidence and witness testimonies painted a chilling picture of his true nature. When Megan Newton's body was discovered in a stone flat on April 2029, the scene left investigators reeling. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime, the sexual assault, the strangulation, the stabbing, it was the chilling precision with which it had been carried out. Megan had welcomed Joseph Trevor into her home out of kindness, only to be met with unimaginable violence. The first clue came from Trevor himself. After fleeing Megan's flat, he wandered the streets in a daze, still wearing the bloodied clothes he had used during the attack. A taxi driver, alarmed by his erratic behavior, called the police. When officers arrived, Trevor made no attempt to deny what he had done. "I've done something terrible," he confessed, his voice devoid of emotion. "You'll find her in the flat." This chilling admission was just the beginning. Investigators found Trevor's DNA all over the crime scene, along with his fingerprints on the knife he had used to stab Megan multiple times. But the most damning evidence came from Megan's body, which bore the marks of a prolonged and vicious assault. The sheer savagery of the attack left no doubt in the minds of detectives. This was not a crime of passion. It was premeditated, calculated, and monstrously cruel. As the investigation unfolded, the full extent of Trevor's dark history began to emerge. Just months before Megan's murder, Trevor had been accused of raping a 17-year-old girl. The case had been strong, there was physical evidence and a credible witness statement, but Trevor had been released on bail pending further investigation. Now, questions swirled around how someone with such a violent accusation against him had been allowed to roam free. Friends and family members of Megan were outraged. "She was failed," one close friend said. "The system let her down. If he had been held accountable earlier, Megan would still be alive today." These sentiments echoed through the community, where grief quickly turned into calls for reform. How many other dangerous individuals were slipping through the cracks of a legal system ill-equipped to deal with such threats? Trevor's behavior leading up to the murder painted a picture of a young man spiraling out of control. Known for his temper and arrogance, he had a history of aggression, though nothing as severe as what he had done to Megan. His parents, both former police officers, had reportedly struggled to discipline him, often covering for his outbursts and shielding him from the consequences of his invincibility. This might have emboldened him, giving him a sense of invincibility. As the forensic evidence mounted, Trevor's defense team had little room to maneuver. His confession, combined with the overwhelming physical evidence, left no doubt about his guilt. But what drove him to commit such a heinous act? Psychological evaluations revealed a deeply disturbed individual, but they stopped short of declaring him mentally ill. Trevor's actions were deliberate, calculated, and devoid of remorse, a chilling profile that offered no easy answers. The community, meanwhile, rallied around Megan's family, holding vigils and marches in her honor. Her death became a symbol of both the dangers women face and the systemic failures that allow predators to escape accountability. Megan trusted him, her family said in a public statement, and he took advantage of that trust in the worst way possible. The trial of Joseph Trevor began in November 2019, 6 months after Newton's brutal murder. It was a case that gripped not just Stoke-on-Trent but the entire UK. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal experts, and members of Megan's community, all desperate to understand how such a young man could commit a crime so horrific. For Megan's family, each day in court was a painful reminder of what they had lost. The prosecution laid out a harrowing case against Trevor, describing him as a predator who exploited Megan's kindness and trust. They argued that Trevor had gone to Megan's flat with the intent to harm her, and once inside, he unleashed a level of violence that shocked even seasoned investigators. This was not an impulsive act, the prosecutor said. This was a calculated, remorseless attack on a young woman who had shown him nothing but kindness. The jury was presented with graphic evidence from the crime scene, photographs of Megan's flat, bloodstains marking the site of her final struggle, and the knife Trevor had used to stab her repeatedly. The prosecution also played recordings of Trevor's chilling confession to the police. "I've done something terrible," he said. "She's in the flat." One of the most devastating moments came when Megan's family took the stand to deliver victim impact statements. Her parents spoke of Megan's bright future, her passion for coaching youth football, and the unbearable void her death had left in their lives. "She was a shining star," her mother said through tears. "She trusted him, and he took everything from her." The defense faced an uphill battle. Trevor's confession, combined with the overwhelming forensic evidence, made his guilt undeniable. Instead, they focused on mitigating factors, arguing that Trevor's actions were the result of a deeply troubled psyche. They presented psychological evaluations that painted a picture of a young man struggling with unresolved anger and a lack of self-control. But the prosecution countered, arguing that Trevor's actions were deliberate and calculated, a far cry from the impulsive outbursts the defense claimed. One of the most chilling revelations came from Trevor's previous rape allegation. The prosecution highlighted this as evidence of a pattern of predatory behavior, arguing that Trevor had been given a second chance he didn't deserve. The system failed Megan, the prosecutor said. This young man should never have been in a position to harm her. As the trial reached its conclusion, the prosecution delivered a powerful closing argument. Megan Newton was an 18-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her, they said. She was kind, she was trusting, and she was betrayed in the worst possible way. The defendant's actions were not the result of a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. They were the calculated, brutal actions of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a unanimous verdict: guilty of rape and murder. Trevor was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 21 years before eligibility for parole. The judge condemned him as a dangerous and predatory individual, adding, "You took advantage of Megan's kindness, and you ended her life in an act of brutal violence. The pain you have caused her family is immeasurable." For Megan's family, the verdict was a bittersweet victory. They had achieved justice, but it couldn't bring Megan back. Outside the courthouse, her mother spoke to reporters. "We're glad he can't hurt anyone else, but this doesn't end our pain. Megan deserved so much more." The courtroom may have delivered its verdict, but for Megan Newton's family, friends, and community, the pain of her loss continues. Megan's life, full of promise and potential, was cruelly taken from her by someone she thought she could trust. The trial of Joseph Trevor brought a measure of justice, but it also revealed a series of systemic failures that demand answers and accountability. One of the most glaring issues was Trevor's previous rape allegation. Many questioned how a young man accused of such a serious crime had been allowed to walk free without closer scrutiny. The case against Trevor had been strong enough for him to face trial, but delays in the system and a decision to grant him bail meant that he was free to offend again. For Megan's family, this failure was a bitter pill to swallow. "He shouldn't have been out there," her mother said. "If the system had worked the way it should, Megan would still be here." Megan's death sparked a nationwide conversation about the justice system's handling of violent offenders. Advocacy groups called for stricter measures to monitor those accused of serious crimes, especially when there is a pattern of predatory behavior. "Megan's story is not just a tragedy, it's a wake-up call," one activist said. "How many more lives have to be lost before we take these issues seriously?" But amidst the grief, there were moments of hope and resilience. Megan's family and friends channeled their pain into action, creating initiatives in her name to support young women and raise awareness about the dangers of predatory behavior. The Megan Newton Foundation was established to provide scholarships for aspiring sports therapists, honoring Megan's dream of helping others through her passion for sports. "This is how we keep her memory alive," her family said, "by helping others achieve what she never got the chance to." In Stoke-on-Trent, Megan's story continues to resonate. Vigils held in her memory drew hundreds of people, many of whom were strangers, moved by the senselessness of her death. Flowers, candles, and messages of love were left outside her flat, transforming the site of her murder into a place of remembrance. "She was so much more than what happened to her," a friend said during one vigil. "She was a light in this world, and we won't let that light go out." For many, Megan's story is a reminder of the hidden dangers that women face every day. It's a call to action to protect those who, like Megan, offer kindness and trust to others. Her death has inspired renewed efforts to educate young people about consent, boundaries, and the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. Megan's family hopes that by sharing her story, they can prevent others from facing the same fate. As time passes, the pain of losing Megan remains, but so does her legacy. She is remembered not just as a victim, but as a vibrant, compassionate young woman whose life touched so many. Her story has sparked change, inspired action, and ensured that her name will never be forgotten. The story of Megan Newton is one of kindness, betrayal, and a justice system that failed to act in time. But it's also a story of resilience, hope, and the power of community to turn tragedy into change. If this story moved you, consider sharing it to honor Megan's memory and raise awareness about the dangers of unchecked violence. For more stories that delve beyond the headlines, make sure to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, the description, for exclusive content and previews of upcoming episodes. Thank you for watching, and let's remember Megan, not for what happened to her, but for the light she brought into this world. See you in the next video.